Cesar.
Good
Buenas.
afternoon. Buenas
Buenos
tardes.
dias.
Noches.
Buenas algo. I don't know. You know, they say, in Mexico, they say buenas, just buenas, like they do
Yeah.
in Peru. Yeah, yeah. And then when I was where was I at? Was it Guatemala? They go bueno instead of bueno. And I'm like, is that like hello? Is that buenas? And they're just like, bueno. I'm like, all right, that's a
I
thing.
I didn't know that one. That's interesting.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that was Guatemala. The other weird thing they say is, when you say goodbye, there's like adios and there's
Yeah.
ciao and there's nos vemos, but they would say platicamos, which is what, like, we'll talk or
Okay.
something. Is that what that? I
Yeah,
I
like
have,
we will talk eventually
yeah. Instead of
without
saying
really the
ciao or
eventually.
adios, they'll say platicamos. I'm like, okay, platicamos.
Well, in my on my dad's side, on the northern side of Mexico, they sometimes they say estamos pendientes, which means like
Really?
we're yeah, it's weird now that I think about it. I have said it a few
We
times, I
need
guess,
each.
when
Is that
when
like we
talking.
need each other? We depend on
No,
each other.
pendientes is like on standby, I guess. It's
Oh,
not
oh,
really
oh,
pending, so
oh.
it's
Okay.
like, okay, we're gonna be on a
We're waiting
standby
for each
for
other.
whatever happens, or I don't know. That's a
Huh.
weird one. Uh,
Curious. Yeah.
and sometimes they shut it. They definitely cut it to just pendientes, which is standby. So
Okay.
platicamos. Yeah,
Platicamos. Yeah. Okay.
interesting. Good. All right. So we're talking about yet again Spanish, but that's not the topic of today. The
Actually, it would be
topic.
fun. It would be fun. Sorry, so sorry. It would be fun to do a podcast and just talk about the tech industry in Latin America. There's interesting. Every cultures are optimized for different things, and even in subcultures like tech in certain countries and certain areas, they're optimized for different things. I think that'd be a fun thing just to talk about on what's it like tech in Mexico versus tech in Peru versus tech here. I don't know. That'd be a fun thing just
It
to
would be
chat
good to
about.
have samples of people. I have worked with people from Uruguay, of course, Mexico, Cuba. Not much more than that, I guess. Brazil,
Yeah.
um, which is yet another interesting, just because no Spanish there for the most
Right.
part.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there are definitely some you can understand, like they're more hardworking than others, and some of the terminology changes. And of course, it's tech, right? So the usage of the words
Right.
in English, it's always fun because everybody
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
its own
Because you're like,
beats in.
PHP for loop. It's like, wait. Are we speaking English or what? Yeah.
I think one of the first times that I had to give training in Spanish, I realized I was speaking half English, and this is after I moved here. Before, I wouldn't even notice, right?
Yeah.
But yes, it's. And then, how do you pronounce it? And then there are some things when I talk to my brother, for example, right? So we're talking about Git, and I say Git branch, and he says Rama, which is the literal meaning of
Yeah. 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 Uh huh.
tree branch, and
But
it was like, okay, what do you say?
yeah, that's funny. That's funny. It is a weird
Yeah.
converging on that. Yeah. Hmm. But I just even mean on perspective. Like when I was in Peru, it's been a while ago though, but like in Peru, the tech scene was all about like services, really, is what it was. So it was like on every corner there was a cafe where you could learn coding and where you could learn Photoshop. Like literally every corner had two or three of those studios, and everybody was going to them. So as a result, you were always talking to someone that was like, and this is a while ago now, 10 years ago plus. It's like, oh yeah, I'm learning Dreamweaver. Or, oh yeah, I'm learning PHP, or I'm learning Cold Fusion. And then you find out it's like next door to their house is a cafe that teaches that, and so that's what they would do every day. So it's just an interesting impact. I don't know. That'd be a fun thing just to talk about.
Yeah, I think it was more than 10 years now. Dreamweaver was probably like 2008.
Oh
when
yeah.
you were in Peru?
Yeah, yeah, 2008. Yep. You're
Okay,
right.
so it's coming up to 15, my friend.
Oh man, I feel old. Doggone it.
You are the only one that feels like that. I feel young. Because 15 years ago, I wasn't in Peru with you. I was somewhere else.
Yeah.
But I don't want to think about it because then I feel like you. Cool.
Oh,
All
you feel
right.
like me. Great. All right, let's get back to the topic. What are we doing here?
The topic today is some of Python based toolings. Are I don't know if it's even Python. You're going to tell us about it. It's called Hex, and the webpage is hex.tech. That is hex.tech.
Mhm.
Talk about one of those things that it is hard for me to pronounce,
Yeah.
but here we are. So I saw the webpage, but I want you to explain it to me and other people around it. What is this tool for? Like, why? What got you into it? How do you find it? Things like that. So let's start with
Mhm.
the what it is, right? What is heck.tech?
Yeah. So first of all, on the domain name, I really do hate the domain name. I don't even like .tech domain names in general for stuff, but it does. Hex.tech is someone didn't, I don't know, like didn't do their internationalization research on that because it's hard to say, hard to read, hard to pronounce. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about. So, whoa, go ahead.
And if you tell me hex, I automatically think about like hexadecimal, I guess, or like I think it's some math related stuff, which might be the
Mm,
case, right? But
fair
it
enough.
doesn't strike to me as like I saw it, right? There are some notebooks, right? And I immediately thought about Jupyter notebooks, but I don't see
Right.
anything on the domain saying that it is a notebook. And maybe I don't know. It's weird. I'm with you. Those custom domain names, dot email, dot tag, dot pizza, dot whatever. I think
Yeah.
they tend to confuse a lot of people, because 95% of the population, or 99%, they just know com and maybe com dot something, and that's about it, right? So
Yeah, right.
cool. All right, so what it is?
So the best they might not want me to explain it this way, but the best way I can explain it is it's simplified Jupyter notebooks. Um, Probably not doing it justice to call it Jupyter notebooks, actually, but that's a great way of saying Jupyter notebooks, but very cool, very powerful, very polished. Um, that's probably the best way to describe it. And so it's great for we could talk about what it is, but it's great for data analytics. You can do some Python in it, some data science in it. Um, yeah, one of the interesting things. So there's a bunch of these that have popped up. This is one of them. Deep Note is another one,
Okay.
and I've used both of those actually. And there's a third one I've used in the last year, and I can't remember what the name of it is. And then of course I've used Google Colab, which is a hosted Jupyter notebook. But one of the things with Jupyter notebooks is they're cool, they're very powerful, but they're hard to run. I think they're hard to run in like a group company environment. They're hard to maintain. The infrastructure, it just sometimes Google Jupyter notebook architecture or structure, or especially like Jupyter notebook AWS architecture, and you can imagine what that looks like.
Yep.
It's just
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like, really, just to run this notebook, I need all this stuff. Now, I mean, you can spin up a notebook like in VS Code or Google Colab, and it's easy. But when you're trying to run it against hardware, it's a pain in the butt. Um, I don't know if you've
I
been exposed to that,
Yeah,
but
I would agree with that. So to me, I'd run a notebook a little while ago. I've been doing it for my job and trying to. I think I mentioned on the last episode, learn some Python.
mhm.
So it's weird because there's no. It's a setup that it's not built by developers, right?
Yeah,
it is a
for
setup
sure.
just built by a data scientist, right? Which totally makes sense. Like, we're not data scientists ourselves. but now
Right.
it's becoming more ubiquitous for people like you and me to use it, right? And
Mhm.
to even learn Python. And that's when we're expecting to have some sort of platform that runs it. um, I remember, I mean, installing Python on macOS, it's its own adventure, just because it's built in, and uh, hopefully Homebrew solves a lot of those issues. But once you were able to run it, then it has its own file navigator, which is interesting to open the
Mhm.
notebook. So like the whole experience is like it's not really an IDE, but in some cases it behaves like an IDE. But then it looks like overpowered because you can see files in all your computer.
Right.
And then if that is locally, then if you think about the company, um, and like how like to share knowledge and to do all of that, you can clearly see that there is a need for that. And as you said, there are like three of them. I think last time we talked about Databricks, and Databricks notebooks are there, and it's based out
Yep.
on Python.
Mhm.
You can have blocks that are Python, I guess Python, PySpark, SQL, so you can mix and match, so they have its own variations. But I think this is going to be more and more popular, right? And I feel like they're a little bit like playgrounds, like Swift playgrounds, right? Like
Yeah.
REPL consoles that you just go and do it, and it
Mhm.
seems like there is a future there. So this is worth doing, and platforms like this, I'm sure they're gonna come up because it makes sense from their website. As you said, they probably don't want you to simplify it as just like well supported Jupyter notebooks. They say that it is a modern platform for data science and analytics that brings together collaborative notebooks, beautiful data apps, and enterprise grade security. That's what they say.
Enterprise grade security. That's so funny. It's like such a tagline for everything. It's like if I had $1, Cesar, for every time I've heard that. SOC
And
2
platform, right?
enterprise, blah blah blah. What? Yeah,
Modern
platform. Right.
platform. What makes a platform, and what makes it modern? Yeah. I mean, yeah, they're
Yeah.
buzzwords, but yeah, you
Yeah.
get it.
It's annoying. It's just like, like all the developer repos now. It's like batteries included, supercharged, batteries included, every single one. It's like, can we batteries really? Um anyway, so
Turbocharge,
I
monorepo, all of those buzzwords right now. Yeah, got
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. Anyway, back to Hex. So one of the cool things that they do is they take the concept of Jupyter notebooks and the power that you have there with infrastructure behind it. You can even pick, your different compute and GPU and stuff behind it. If there's different plans for that, and you don't have to do any of that. It just kind of works magically behind the scenes. And Google Colab does that too, but Google Colab just gives you kind of a raw Jupyter notebook. What Hex does is goes, we're going to take that idea and that context, and we're going to make it more like an actual notebook, not just like blocks of
Hmm.
code, I guess. So they really embrace the idea that a notebook tells a better story than a Tableau dashboard. Um, and I like how they approach it. Deep Note's doing that kind of thing too, and some others, but I really like how Hex landed on it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Um, but I think that's a crucial point to talk about because on their website, you're right. They say we're a modern whatever platform for analytics, which is an interesting take on it because when you say analytics, usually people think like Metabase and some of these others. You write some SQL, you ingest some data or whatever, and then you get dashboards. You make a chart, you make another chart, you make a table, you make a graph, and you put them together and create a dashboard. Tableau, Amplitude, whatever. Name the tools, right? So when you read that, you think, oh, it's analytics, but really it's notebooks that you stuff analytics in. And one of the nice things that notebooks do is they help you tell a story. They piece together a story, which is much better than an analytic dashboard. You open up Tableau, it doesn't tell you a story. I don't care what people say, they're boring, and you end up having to have meetings around it because you don't understand the numbers. Whereas a notebook, you have the power of creating the queries, building out the data, dropping in charts, but then you can also talk about it. You can drop in images, it's dynamic. So you can scrape something, pull it in, you can have other research documents, text, that kind of thing. So I think they make that part of the Jupyter Notebook concept a lot better than just Jupyter Notebook, if that makes sense.
It does.
Um,
It does make sense. Couple of things there. So most of the time, Tableau dashboards or even just plain analytics tools, you end up taking screenshots and building a PowerPoint presentation.
yeah,
Which in your
yeah,
case, it seems like you can build a dashboard, right? And because it's or sorry, a notebook, and because
right.
you can add a lot more comments and a story and kind of like explain your reasoning, it seems like you don't need to do that. You can just go through it in a presentation, or you can just send it beforehand, and people should be able to understand it because it's kind of like a mix of everything. That's what I heard from you, and I think it's nice. The other thing, and this is why I'm curious. You mentioned analytics and ingestion. Where is the data? Like, is it running data back to whatever you have it store? Is it ingesting data? Like, how does that piece work?
So that's a good question. They've got connectors, so you can connect like direct to BigQuery, for example, which is what I'm doing for one of my projects. So I just
Hmm.
pull in BigQuery. You can also import CSVs and do things like that as well. But they do have connectors for all sorts of stuff. So you can run it on there. It's interesting. They just added a new feature. You can actually write back to your data source if you want to, which is an interesting concept. So rather than just being analytics, it's a proper notebook that you can literally write back to your data store. Um, so it's turning out to be a pretty flexible tool. Some of the really interesting things you can do, and even like so they have these ideas of blocks, just like in Jupyter. You know, you've got your blocks of or Notion. If you're familiar with Notion, and you have no idea what we're talking about with Jupyter. Notion has those blocks where you can say, click this, and I want a block of this or this. So you can create a SQL block, and then that creates a data frame, which you can access in Python if you want to, or you can access, they have charts where you can just pick it and then from the SQL and say, I want to make a chart out of this or whatever, or a map. Um, but anyway, so it creates a data frame or a variable where you can reference later on in the notebook. So that's really cool. Um, but it's orthogonal. So then you can mess around with it on Python. You can create another thing and then access that through another SQL query. It's really cool how it's orthogonal that way. How they do
Okay.
that. Um,
One of the things that I like from their website was the gallery portion of it, because that gives
mm,
you, and we're gonna put a show a link to the show notes, a link in the show notes to the
mm,
gallery, and that gives you an idea of what you can build, which is interesting because a lot of the notebooks, they're so generic that they don't want to be prescriptive, and these guys have different examples. So I like that. I think that's a nice touch for somebody like me or like our listeners that might not have heard about it without really kind of like trying to do something out of the box, right? So that gives you
right.
something. And along those lines, we're technically doing a friction log. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning. So the next question would be, who is it for? Like, who's your persona in this case for Hex?
So it's definitely for analytic people or BI people that like to get their hands dirty and write some code. But it's also for analytic people that don't want to do that. So if they write a little bit of SQL and then they can get anything they want out of it. So it's definitely for that. Data science stuff, they say it's for data scientist stuff. I played around with a couple things. It works, but I don't know how it scales across, some of the data science use cases, like when you want to use Keras or TensorFlow or something like that. I doubt. Maybe it works. I have no idea. I haven't really. That wasn't my use case, and I didn't really test that part of the frictions. Um,
Okay.
but it's definitely for more like analytics and business folks that can write SQL and generate stuff. If you know Python or R, you can use those blocks in there too, which is really cool. And the
So
other, go ahead, go ahead.
when you say business people, I mean, they still need to know a little bit of SQL, I guess, or R or Python, or okay, or do they have some
SQL.
sort of like drag and drop kind of thing? Okay, no, that makes sense. So
Yeah.
business people that actually can write the SQL query.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you can write SQL queries for somebody and then they can use that in their notebook. So that, there's that. The other cool thing that is extra that they add, which I really like, is the publishing features that they have is really neat because you can publish it. Like you said, you saw those examples. All those are just published notebooks that people have found and published, and people, you can share it with people publicly, privately. You can add comments. So there's that whole like publish workflow that is not really that easy to do on in Jupyter Notebook, and they've kind of nailed that, I think, which is
Yeah.
cool.
It seems not that enterprisey that you can do that, because enterprises are very protective of their database. I assume you can probably have a plan where you can, like, your users cannot really share to the outside. But yeah, it's interesting. One of my favorite ones on the gallery is the one called "Finding a New Home Planet," which is it's an interesting. I think it's a good example of what you can do. So
Yeah.
that's a good one. So okay, all right.
Another neat thing that they do, I appreciate it anyway, was, so you're writing your notebook and you're building stuff, and then you can say, hey, I want this on the published page, the page that shows up, and you can move it around on the page where it shows up. So when you're publishing a paper or whatever, it's there. One of the cool things that it does, though, is those blocks, it knows intelligently what dependencies it has. So if you're writing a Python block or a SQL block and it's dependent on some other block behind it, then when you hit run, it will go through like a dependency tree and know that it only needs to execute these queries to update the thing you're trying to look at. So then you're not, if you have this really complicated notebook, you're not rerunning all of your queries every time you hit run. Because you know how that goes. Like you're hitting your data source at BigQuery, and that Google's pulling that slot machine down every time you
Yeah.
hit query there. So they guard against some of that, which is really cool.
Okay, that's interesting. So the sequence of events might not be just from top to bottom, but also on how you're building, how you present your data. It goes by dependencies, right? By whatever you're kind of like presenting. That's where it runs. That's interesting and different.
Yeah.
And I'm not very familiar with Deep Note that you mentioned, but that seems like a good approach where. Um, One of the things that I had with Databricks notebooks is it has to be sequenced from top to bottom, right? You have to, otherwise, it will show you an error, right? It will detect the dependency enough to tell you, hey, you need to run this first, or I can't find this data set or something. But I don't think you can just order it different for presentation and then just let it figure out what the dependency is. So, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So your main use case is analytics, right? You're trying to find.
Mine is
Okay.
because we use BigQuery, and we have customers that are state agency people, biologists, scientists, professors, that are studying fish, and so we have all this data, regulation views, and stuff like that. And so they're always asking for data sliced a different way or whatever. And so in some cases, it's just easier for me to write some SQL queries in Hex. I'm talking about write some SQL queries, do a little bit of Python, generate some charts, publish that thing, and then send it to the scientist or whoever wants to see it. And then I'm done. And Hex is really good for that. It's like this published paper with the analytics and data they need, some explanation. Here you go. So I really like it for that. And I've only used it a few times since I started using it, maybe like 3 times, but I love it. And the other cool thing is you can set it to regenerate itself on an interval. So actually one of our reports, once a month, it just wakes up, runs through all the queries, and then it sends an email of the notebook. And so you get the actual email of the notebook in your email, and you can click on it and view it on the web page too. So that's awesome. I really like that
That's
a
very
lot too.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cron jobs, man. They keep coming back in different
Yeah.
ways, right? It's
Yep.
technically cron jobs, and um, I have seen it called many different things. I remember Kubernetes jobs and scheduled jobs and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're just cron jobs, right? And most of them will get programming that way. Uh, very simple use case that goes back all the way to the beginning of computing, I guess. All right, so that's how you're using it. Of course, if you were a data scientist, you could run some predictions on your data, I guess, and then figure out how it behaves with GPU enabled things. But for now, I guess mostly Python and SQL is what you're using for building your
Yep.
dashboards.
Yeah, I'm using
Okay,
Python and SQL, and then a couple times I drug some images and some other type things in there just to put in the presentation.
make it pretty.
But yeah, make it pretty and contextual and stuff. But yeah, it's just Python and SQL, and it's cool. Like you can say, hey, these are the dependencies or these are the libraries I want to use in Python, and you just import them in and use them as you would. I've done that with plot libraries. I've done it with generating some graphs. Um, so it's pretty flexible from that perspective.
Fair enough.
Pandas too. Pandas is your friend, like because all of the anytime you write a SQL query, the output of that is a data frame, and so obviously with pandas in Python, you can manipulate it, write queries against it, and then it generates another variable that you can use elsewhere. It's great. It's really easy to use.
So for the non-Python people, most of the people that know us, they know us probably from mobile development and JavaScript and some of those things.
Mhm.
Pandas is a library from Python. It's not a standard library, but it's one of those packages that everybody uses.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
basically just manage data sets and transformation and do stuff like that, which in the Python context is called data frames. So most of the time you're going to see a variable or two called df. Um, that's really what it is, right? It's like one of those basic node packages that everybody
Yeah,
will use. So it's interesting, like moment for dates and in your JavaScript world.
yeah.
Pandas is just whatever you use to move data around, and it's pretty standard, I guess. Pretty much any library, any of the notebooks that we have talked about, even if I don't know Deep Note, I am 100% sure that they support
Oh
pandas
yeah.
in one way or another. So
Oh yeah.
it's pretty
Yeah, they
basic.
would be dead if it was like, oh yeah, you can write Python except pandas. Peace out. Everybody would be like, nope.
Yep, it's very, very, very trivial to support that. So okay, good. That's a great overview. We talk about your use case, the personas, who is it for, what it is. Now let's talk about the friction log. We haven't done this in a while, but for people that have been following us for a while, they know that we have three main areas. And we always start with the good, which is called the lights. And then we'll go with the frictions, which are just things that you notice. Some might be a little bit good, some might not be good. But it's interesting feedback, right? And the
Yeah.
last but not least would be our blockers, right? Things that totally prevent you to do something, or they were just so wrong that you lost your train of thought and you had to start all over again. So the lights. Let's start with that. Tell me, I don't know, two, three. What have
Yeah.
you found so far?
I mean, I've already mentioned a few already just in the describing Hex, but some others would be it's very easy to just start using and get into. Like you don't even have to know SQL per se. If you have CSVs or data that you want to present in a good way, you could literally just drag in the CSV, use that. It'll create a data frame from that. You can start creating charts off of it. And then you're like, oh, I want to manipulate it. And then you can start. They actually have visual pivot tables where you can do that all within the notebook. And then you're like, oh, now I need more control. And then you jump down to Python. And then it's really cool how you can progressively get into this tool as you go. So good on them for that. Really like that part of it. And have you used it at all yet, Cesar? Or you've just seen the website? Yeah.
No, I'm just I saw the website intentionally. I will give it a try. I might have a CSV somewhere that I can use to play around.
I'll give you one. The other just delight on a friction logging on this was their activation flow is really good. And what I mean by activation, it's like this typical product meaning of activation, which is you sign up and how do you activate that user over time, get them to use it. And so I don't remember the interval at which I got emails, but every email I got from their flow, either onboarding or activation flow, was really good. Like the first email had really compelling things where I'm like, oh, I really want to learn that. And I click on it and read it. And then the next email I got a couple days later was something more advanced or cooler I didn't know about. Click on that and read it. So they do a really good job of pulling you in or pulling you through that learning process of the tool. So I thought that I definitely marked that down as a delight, because usually activation emails and flows are really boring and really terrible, and that wasn't terrible.
I recall Trello uses that, Notion uses that. They will send you an email daily or every 2 days that says, tip number 1, here's something you can do. Tip number 2. So I'm curious to see what this is, because it's pretty common that they try to.
Theirs is not like that. Theirs isn't like tip number 1. They do things. It's more like what's the word? Concept based, and then maybe story based or something. I don't know. I just remember it being much more interesting than stuff like that. Like, hey, here's your tip of the day as you get in or something. So,
okay. What else?
So the cool thing that they offer is these layouts. So it doesn't matter what your notebook looks like. You can add it to a layout, which is what gets published. And when you add it to the layout, it's easy to do, and you can drag it, move it around and stuff, and it doesn't really affect your notebook. So that, plus then saying, run this every week or every day and email it to me, or email to these people, that whole like publishing flow is like effortless. I really like how they did it. It's not cumbersome. It's not a bunch of options. It's very straightforward. I was impressed with it.
So layouts are like creating your own dashboards, right, to publish your data. And that goes back to what you were saying about, if I put something on my layout that has some dependency, then it will know what needs to run to make sure that that dependency is up to date. And then I guess the scheduling and the email, right? So all of that. Interesting. I will consider that a presentation layer of your work, I guess.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
So that's interesting. That definitely piqued my eye. What about collaboration in real time? Was that, I know for the most part, you might have been working solo, but did you ever try any like real
I
time
didn't try it.
collaboration? How does that work? Okay.
I didn't try it. It looks cool. I read about it. But I don't have a use case. You didn't want to hang out with me while I was doing SSR, so
I'm out of here. Shots fired. We should try it out. I don't know. We need to get some data for friction log so we can play around with different tools. All right. So the lights. That's interesting. So it's a notebook with superpowers that you really enjoy, with some presentation layer. It was easy to get on board with and to understand the features. And then you actually have a practical use case. So it's not just, hey, I can run SQL. It's more about, hey, I can tell a story on my end. Okay. That's good. That's a very good outcome, I would say. So now let's get to frictions, right? And frictions will be, I guess, somehow also comparisons with on why you're using Hex as opposed to Deep Note or just plain Jupyter Notebook. So, what are the frictions that you got there?
So one thing that I ran into a lot with Hex, so actually started using Deep Note first before I started using Hex. Hex has some extra things that it attracted me more. Where I'm like, I just use this over Deep Note. But I don't think it performs as well as Deep Note. There's multiple times where Hex, the performance it wasn't as good, especially with large data sets. Um, I had a few data sets. I don't remember how many rows. I can't remember how many rows, but in my opinion, it wasn't that big. But whatever. If it was 30,000 rows, whatever. Um, Deep Note didn't have a single problem with Hex. I had errors a few times. Memory added.
Was that performance? I mean, they're big queries, right? So it could be that how they translate their SQL into building those queries, that there can be some improvements there. It could also be the experience, right? How snappy it feels, right? So that
Hmm.
might be another factor. So that's an interesting one. Okay, interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's curious. And kind of the other friction I wrote down actually, I think plays into this, which is the map widget. Well, okay, so when I started using it, they didn't have a map widget that you could use. So I would like import a map library in Python and then render that as an image and put that in the notebook. That's how my notebook code worked. Um, and with that, I first started with Uber's what's their GL map library? I'm trying to remember what it's called. Kepler. Well, Kepler's the app, whatever it's called. Kepler. If you look up Uber's Kepler.gl, super cool map library. It's really awesome. Anyway, they have a Python dependency where you can import it and render it with however you want, heat maps with dots on a map, whatever. Um, and so it just doesn't work. Period. Doesn't work.
Okay.
And while I figured that out, like days later, they came out with a map component that you can use in it, and it works great. It's not as good as Uber's thing, but it works great. But the problem is, it chokes as soon as you have a bunch of data points on it. So again, back to performance. Um, I had to take out a bunch of data just so I could render the map. So that's not cool. Deep Note don't have a problem with that at all. So that was definitely a friction for me. And I emailed support. Support was actually really good. Maybe that should be a delight. Every interaction I had with support was great.
Okay. Were you, I guess that could also be a blocker if you are very dependent on, Uber's GL mapping. So it could be something. So that's interesting because it seems like they built this great experience, but then you have that performance hit that I guess it's technical debt, right? We all build software
Mhm.
products, so I assume that there is something going on there. So okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. Any blockers or real blockers that you're like, oh, this is bad?
No, I mean, maybe the biggest one was that map issue because I couldn't use. I really like that map library, and I just couldn't use it. So that's probably the as close to a blocker as possible, I think, for me.
Okay, good. Issues with the connectors? Anything? I mean, I know you only use the BigQuery, but any issues with that?
Yeah, no, I didn't have any issues with that. Really easy to set up, so that was easy. No problems there. Sometimes things wouldn't render on the um, what do you call it? The layout, the published layout things that sometimes it wouldn't render, and it wasn't always clear why. And again, it goes back to that performance thing. Something was chugging in the background, and it would either fail and you didn't know why, or it would take longer than expected.
Okay.
So sometimes that wasn't clear. That's a minor friction because that didn't happen a lot. I just noted it as something that did happen.
That could happen. Okay. I really like the changelog webpage for it
Yes.
does I don't
Yes.
know, it's like when we were talking about cron jobs, right? It's like going back to you used to get software, it will have a changelog.txt file or something, and then it will be the whole history of how the product evolves. They made it like 2022 version of that, which is very interesting as opposed to I don't know, some of the release blogs, things like that you see these days. So interesting. Okay, good. Anything else? Any other remarks or anything we're mentioning?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if you're looking for something where you need to share some data and explain data around stuff, Hex is a great place to look, in my opinion. I really like it.
So it's Rick's recommended.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. It's an interesting tool. Not the best domain. We're gonna agree on that. And I'm very happy that you got some time to draw some of these notes and to explain to us, and hopefully it will help other people to try it out. So I have nothing left to say. Then thank you, Rick. This has been good, and uh, we're gonna keep figuring out what's next.
Awesome. All right. See you next time.
All
Ciao.
right. Later.
Platicamos.
Estamos pendientes.